Hey there, the unretired engineer coming to you again to talk about the world, engineering projects, science fiction, and today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the concept of post-labor economics and the reality, and I think the issues with it, though I think it has a strong through thread of reality to it. So, we're in a world of rapid change. AI and robots and other things are all coming together. The decades of work that I have done, and not myself, it's really not myself. I've been working in the area of more electric, and the reality is that mantra has really finally taken hold and is shaking the world as it moves forward. Robots had to move from hydraulics and pneumatics to electric, and then those electric had to be miniaturized, and the controls had to be also miniaturized immensely, and then the sensor fusion, and intelligence had to be integrated. All of that is coming together, and it's really pushing us into a new world. And because of that, there is a lot of angst about what it's doing. And to be blunt, um, you have to take some of it with a grain of salt. Some of the big companies, they have a very large economic interest in shaking the world and shaking cash out of people's pockets by shaking the world. And so you can't really totally trust their view on the world. But at the same point, they have a lot of valid points, and they are making a huge difference, and it's making a difference in the world, and we have to pay attention to that. So one of the things that I want to talk about was the standard advice, and what the reality, the way I see it is, from the seats of the unretired engineering, hardware engineering in particular. And the standard advice is learn to prompt, get a data degree, become a creator, all those things. But you need to be a bit careful in that when you see those people who are making that advice have usually very deeply embedded in the system. And a lot of them are actually being affected by it in a great deal. If you are a software developer of any sort, your world is changing radically and rapidly and constantly right at the moment. And consequently, there is a real need to be, thinking about what comes next, where the world is going to be, what you're going to be doing. But the reality is then taking that into the rest of the world isn't as real as you would think about it. The thing is, in software, there is very much, it's weightless, right? There isn't that, it's just bits on a disk, right? You can replicate it infinitely. You can replicate it in seconds. And, it is, its own thing. It has some high power, that those sets of things make it very powerful, but they also limit the reach of what it's going to do until you can start moving atoms. But, with all of that, there's been a lot of talk, and one of the people that I spend time listening to and think has some very deep thoughts is a guy called Dave Shapiro, who has come up with the term of post-labor economics. And essentially is basically saying, historically, we have traded our physicality, our time, our brain for money, right? And we traded it for money, and then we took that money and gave it to somebody else, and they then traded their, body, brain, time to us for that money. And that's what made the economy go round. If that goes away, if you are no longer making money because the robot or the computer can do all the work that you were doing, how are you going to be? And there's a lot of things to talk about on that note. But the reality is that view, David is a developer, right? He's very much into the software. He is, very aware of the physicality of the computers he works with. I don't think he completely sees really the amount of friction that having to move atoms really entails in the real world. So, whenever I hear, these asymptotes and I see the world changing infinitely, I have to, as a hardware person, I have to ask is, where does it break? Nothing continues forever. Um, you get into those things like a black hole of, infinite mass and an infinitely small point. The universe breaks. The math doesn't work. Same thing here. The math, you reach a certain point, the old assumptions just break, and you have to rethink what's going on. Again, I've already gone over it. The hidden premise in a lot of this is that it's frictionless, that everything's going to move, and that really isn't the way it is. The digital economy is a big thing. It is actually in itself a huge accelerant of our world and very important, but it isn't the whole world. And even at the end of the day, when I get on Amazon, I do the inspection of looking at all the different options and I say, oh, that looks like the best solution. And okay, it's at a good price. Bing, it has to turn up on my desk. Somebody had to make it. Somebody had to stock it. Somebody had to drive it down my very rough driveway and deliver it to my door. The reality is the moving those atoms has a very high level of friction that the software just doesn't overcome. So, when you think about AI and all the rest of it, think about it. We already know there's a whole bunch of angst about power and water and all the very just physicality, data center, a big blank building, it's ugly. So, but the reality is that that's the limit, right? That physicality is one of the real limits. They can't just say, oh, the AI says I need another gigawatt of power, I need another gigacenter, I need, whatever, and it just poof, it's there. No, I mean, you're basically talking years of work and millions of man hours of labor to get that instantiated. And the robots to build all of that don't exist yet. And there's going to be another millions of man hours to build those robots, and they're never going to be, kind of frictionless. So, at the end of the day, you really need to think about the fact that the world is not code, and the physicality. There is a reason that the structural people and the electricians and the plumbers and all the rest of it are going through boom times right now because those skills are fairly limited. They're very physical. They're very much a thing in a person. And you're not going to get rid of that for a long time. I mean, robots will probably eventually replace most of that, maybe all of it eventually. But for today, tomorrow, probably throughout the rest of our lifetimes, that physicality is going to be a very human thing, and we need to keep on that. So there's a constraint there. There's a constraint of physicality. Somebody owns the property, right? Somebody has to deliver that steel. Somebody has to mine that silicon and refine it. Somebody, there is very much a series of constraints, and that constraint is real. Again, atoms, and that's where you need to stand. The other is there is basically a thing is okay, a AI or whatever can make all sorts of great prognostications. There has to be a want someplace in the system. There has to be a need that's being fulfilled. And that need is driven by humans, not by machines, because the machine doesn't want anything at the end of the day. So, it is that, right? So none of this can be abstracted away. So it's very real. It's going to remain that way, and it's going to be a place where humans can act, and so it's going to be something you can work on. You know, I would say, that where a lot of people is, you need to be right. If you were to say, okay, what do I need to do? You know, what do I need to advise my kids? What do I need to advise my friends, etc.? Is basically you need to own a piece of the physical bottleneck, the power, the resources, what the manufacturing or whatever. So again, I hate to say it, but owning stocks, a broad portfolio, all the things that have been talked about for a long time, they are very real. Owning that is important because those are all going to be physical constraints, and they're all going to be monetized and continue to be monetized, and maybe even become a bigger part of the future than they were in the past. And so, it's a strong place to stand. The other one is to provide, is to help conduct, is to be at the top of the chain, telling the system what to do, how to do it, and also being an input. I've talked in the past that AIs are great as an adjunct, but they are not great originators because they're an averaging function. At the end of the day, they basically take the sum total of human knowledge and also human mistakes, other things, put it all together, average it out, and that's basically becomes their intelligence. And that averaging function is the thing that you need to work against, because you can give your nuance to it, your focus to it. I know there's a whole bunch of stuff about how great Mythos and some of the other systems that are just coming online are about a lot of this. I'm not, again, the AIs are as bad as they're ever going to be today. They're going to get better, right? But the reality is they are still averages, and they are still going to have a tendency towards some average. And they're, as good as they may get, they're always going to be that. And, unless they become personified in physics, in a physical reality, and in a narrower viewpoint, they're going to be something that requires some level of top level direction and lower level texturing to provide interest, or everything's just going to get homogenized and the world won't be very interesting to live in. So, own the architecture, own the client, the project, use the tools to automate, use the tools to, to accelerate yourself, to expand your capabilities. And that way we can all move much more quickly, agilely into the future and generate more value and deliver that value to the rest of the world. And I think again the virtuous circle kind of moves us forward. Again, none of this is prescriptive. Everybody's going to take their own different route, but again, there are places to be, I think, and you need to think in those places. And just being a creator, being prompt engineer, being a data engineer, those aren't necessarily, I think, key line, top line places to be. I think there are other places you need to be. But, so one of the things, you have to think about is, okay, so me, right? Talked about myself in the past, right? So 68, pushed out of a company that I really liked working for, doing work on electrification that I really enjoyed and thought was valuable. I pushed out because the economics that the company had followed were not working, and basically drove them into the ditch. So, and I've been working 40 years in the world I've just talked about. The real hardware, real atoms, being able to, yes, work with the computer intelligence, but make things and create. And yet, a year on from that upsetting phone call, I'm still looking for work, right? I have no real interest in retiring. I'm not doing badly, but in the end, I would like to get a job, but the reality is that the channel for renting out my time to somebody is really about being the right age in the right zip code, and a firm who wants you, right? It's a very narrow niche for everybody, and that niche tends to be narrowing over time, as companies use tools to look at, all the applications, and they're looking for something very, very specific, or they think they're looking for something very, very specific, and that tends to narrow down, the number of opportunities. And again, I live where I live, not willing to move, so that limits my opportunities. But again, it is very much a matter of no solution is perfect. And I just take it as data, right? You need to be in the right place at the right time with the right set of skills. It's called luck, but the reality is that it's all the right things coming together at the right time and moving on. So don't bet on being the best ever employee. Don't bet on, kowtowing to the company. Bet on yourself and developing the best set of skills and finding the right place to stand so that, you can basically build a life that makes sense for you. Going back to post-labor economics, I think it sounds good. I think, and it may sound clean. The reality is, I don't think, David Shapiro says it's going to be, and I don't think it's going to be. No transition is ever neat, clean. And the old economy isn't vanishing, right? It can't evaporate into the cloud with software because real atoms, right? And so there's always going to be a place for that. And your embodiment and your ability to move in the real world and do things in the real world is always going to be an important thing. And your ability then to also be a being in the world with your own set of important attributes is going to be very important. And don't let that get ground down. And don't let the headlines panic you. I mean, the reality is though there are a lot of tropes that jobs are vanishing, the reality is if you look at different sets of metrics, it looks like that actually jobs are expanding. And jobs are moving, and jobs are changing, and people's roles are changing, and what they do is changing. All of the things, it's changing, right? Whenever you then pick up data has a tendency to be back-looking and assuming that the future is going to be like the past, and it often will lead you astray because the future is never like the past. But again, find a place where you can stand, find something, and then build someplace you can stand over time, both money or resources collected to yourself, but skills collected to yourself, people connections collected to yourself. Again, put it out in the world, work with people, be as open and giving as you can be. But I'm not saying just be a Scrooge. But reality is, you also need to make sure that you and yours are getting what they need first before moving on. So anyway, that's the unretired engineer's viewpoint on the post-labor economics writ large, and the physical bottleneck. And so hopefully I've added some value to you and your thoughts. So hit the like, hit subscribe, hit the comments, And I'll be back to talk about something in engineering projects or science fiction soon. Thank you. Cheers.